Hello, everyone.
Are you on break now?
Hi, I'm Kara Warner. I work for People Magazine, and I have the pleasure to be your moderator today. And I'm just going to get right to it and introduce this wonderful cast. Please welcome Mr. Jon Favreau, the director. Ms. Lupita Nyong'o, the voice of Raksha. Mr. Neil Setti, Mowgli. Sir Ben Kingsley, the voice of Bagheera. Giancarlo Esposito, the voice of Aquila. And producer Brigham Taylor. I almost said Brigham Young. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. So I will just start things off and then turn it over to you guys. Mr. Favreau, can you talk about why this movie at this time? Like, what convinced you to go for it right now?
Well, a lot of it was the enthusiasm of Disney and specifically Alan Horn, who's really connected with this film, with the story from the Kipling stories when he was growing up, and I connected very much with the animated film when I was growing up, and so we had common ground of both having great affection for this property, and the question became, if we love it so much in those other forms, why do it now? And as he pointed out to me, he says, look, when he saw Life of Pi, he realized that the technology may have come to a point where you can actually tell the story in a different way and maybe bring some of what existed in his imagination when he was growing up visually onto the big screen. And I was very compelled with the idea of taking what can be done in visual effects now. And I was also very impressed with films like Planet of the Apes, Avatar, Life of Pi as well, and specifically what was done in Gravity, the way that they filmed the principal photography almost as though it were an element shoot for an effects piece, and it became a big puzzle. And after sleeping on that and thinking about it, I came up with a take on it. And when I came back and we all discussed it, it sounded really, really cool. And so 100 years ago was the book, 50 years ago was the animated film, and now 50 years later, it's time to update the story for our generation.
I want him dead.
The jungle is no longer safe. I'll return him to where he belongs.
If you send him back to the man village, they'll ruin him. They'll make a man out of him.
You will always be my son.
I'm Mowgli, and this is my home.
Actors, I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how Jon convinced you to come on board, or sort of what you loved most about jumping in.
Jon sat next to me at a party. He seated himself next to me with his benign smile and invited me to play Bagheera. And I think I said yes before you got to the end of the scene.
Yes, we had met on the set of Iron Man 3.
Yep.
And I went from being completely starstruck to being impressed until finally just feeling a lot of affection for him. Sir Ben's an incredibly generous, warm, wonderful storyteller in person, and being an actor, I got some whole days, which I'm not used to having, and we spent some time together in Miami.
Nice. I think that the captain in charge of the project brings his or her taste to the project, and I knew Jon well enough, and I'm fond enough of him to know that his taste and judgment and his perception of humanity and childhood and storytelling completely concur with mine, so it was a joy to join this beautiful project of his.
How were you convinced?
Well, I met with Jon while I was very busy with the campaign for 12 Years a Slave at the time that I met with John, and he very quietly walked me through his idea for this version of the Jungle Book. And what struck me was the compassion with which he was talking about these characters. You know, there was all this state-of-the-art stuff he was going to do with it, but at the heart of it was the love of the story and like a real vision for each character that he was going to bring to life. And for me, that was what got me.
Nice. Mr.
John and I were working on, John called me to do a trailer for a game called Destiny. And there was a little piece in the beginning of that trailer that father was reading to his son the story of Mowgli from the book. And so we connected immediately in between takes talking about the book and the material. And I'm a Kipling lover. And it went away. And wouldn't it be cool if one day this could be a re-realized film? And John is so, as Sir Ben said, really in touch with all of his experiences, and which is really wonderful when you meet someone who is that keen and that sharp, who has not only the memory of it, but has the actual feeling for it. And so we had this wonderful conversation regarding it, and then months later, he called me and said, "Hey, guess what?" Which excited me very, very deeply.
Just in my head, remembered him reading the strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. And as we were developing the script for Jungle Book that I was hired for, completely years later, I think, or a year later, I remembered him reading that when we worked together, and I said, that's the guy we need for Aquila, who's the one who's sort of passing the law down to the next generation of wolves. So it's very weird how these things kind of, it's hard to imagine that there's not some guiding force to the way all of things that seemingly are.
Exactly, for me it's
play out.
synchronicitous, because for me this story came from my mother. I come from divorced parents, and I have a brother. So my mother would read this Law of the Jungle to us because it was us three. We had to survive. It was the three of us. And so it really meant something very deep inside me. It's like when I tell my 4 girls now, you never leave a man behind. When you go to the bathroom, anywhere, you never leave anyone behind. So that plays through to my
that
life.
became the theme. As we developed the script, that became our theme. And it all came from just drawing back to the Kipling, drawing back to this experience, hearing a wonderful performance in my head that I had heard, and then so it organically evolved into that.
Nice. Last question from me before I turn it over to you guys. Neil, if you could talk about how crazy your auditions were, and then sort of those first meetings you all had. I understand Mr. Favreau sort of had you sort of work through things, and if you could just kind of talk about what that was like starting to play around with the material.
It felt like it was too easy, like that shouldn't have happened like so easily. I just auditioned once and John really liked me, and then the first time I met Sir Ben Kingsley and Lupita, I voice recorded with Sir Ben, and I met you at D23, right, the convention, and that was a lot of fun. I got to see like my face.
And what about the sort of how you orchestrated everyone meeting each other? And
Well, I tried to get them to perform as much as I could together, because I didn't want, I've done animated voices before, and it tends to degrade eventually to, okay, just say it again louder. and depending on how good the filmmaker is, either they use the loudest take because it has the most energy and wakes the kids up in the audience, or they could weave together the subtlety of a performance, but it's a lot to ask of people. And I wanted this to feel like a live action film and not an animated film, and part of the key was to get a very conversational performance. And I know very much from being an actor, you rely upon your scene partner, and the energy of a scene partner modulates your energy and affects it, because we're a communal species. We mirror each other, we key off each other, there's little status relationships going on, and scenes have to build and have a shape to them, and that comes from, it's a team sport. You play it like a tennis match with the person you're in front of the camera with. Luckily, Neil came with me whenever I went to different locations, or I think Sir Ben was the first person that Neil worked with, and of course, he's a a wonderful teacher and mentor and experienced thespian. And so passing good habits on to the next generation, which works so well for the relationship between the two of them on screen, and with Bill Murray as well, and then to get Bill Murray with Christopher Walken as well. So it's always trying to get combos and making sure that I had reference or capture data for the animators to work from.
I'm curious for the actors to talk about surrendering themselves, their personalities, and some of their physical features into the characters they're voicing, and the relationship that an actor now has with the kind of surreal special effects that John has so expertly created with his team for this film. So starting with maybe Age Before Beauty, Sir Ben, would you like to address that?
My secret to my performance, I discovered later, which is odd, but I had an intuitive feeling, grasp of something in him, and I realized much later that I actually am playing Kipling, that Bagheera is Rudyard Kipling. He's the voice of Kipling in the story.
Relax, kid. No need to get worked up, okay?
Where am I?
This is a cave. It's my cave. You don't remember what happened, do you?
No.
I saved your life. Yeah, I snatched you from the jaws of death, the coils of death, if you will. And lucky for you, your new favorite hero, Old Blue here, just happened to be passing by. No big deal. Just tell me this. Can you climb?
Yeah.
Then let's quit wasting time and get on with it.
Get on with what?
Payback, kid. Payback.
What do you mean payback? Payback for what?
My goodness, Bagheera is Kipling. So that was although I didn't recognize it, sometimes an actor's intuition is buried and you don't realize what you're mining as a source of energy until perhaps afterwards. But I'm privileged to be the voice of Kipling, a man I greatly admire and loved. And when I was in the Boy Scouts, our troop leader, no, I was in the Cubs actually, which is before the Boy Scouts, our troop leader is called Arkela.
Wow. Well, for me, reading the book as a child really made a difference for me. It allowed me to dream, and it allowed me to dream big, to have courage, to have connection. For me, I always wanted to be Mowgli as a boy because there was a freedom within that, and a freedom to be able to express myself the way I've always wanted to. I found that freedom through being an actor. And then seeing the movie really did something else to my imagination. It allowed me to understand how we create relationships with each other and how those relationships are things that we can really hold on to. Not much that's material can we really hold on to, although we still like the shiny, glossy things. So for me to do this was, and you used a beautiful word, surrender. You know, I didn't know what John would do in the room, but he is a challenger. And he challenges in a very graceful way for you to do something very different, to have the elements that he saw in you to be able to do this through your vocally, but then allows himself to be courageous enough to ask you questions so that you can play against some of the things that you're used to doing. So for me, in the room and having John there with me, he always challenged me to play against things and do things a little bit differently, to have strength and not just to be the loudest person speaking. And which then allowed me to see Raksha, to see Lupita's face, and to create that for myself in front of me when we were having conversations. So I'm honored to be a part of this movie because there's so many different elements that go into making a film of this nature or any film. And I'm just a channel for this particular character that has to bring some love, compassion, yet tough love to this young boy.
And this is my first voice-over role, and I was attracted to it because Raksha is like the eternal mother, and she chooses she chooses to take care of this creature who is not one of her own, but as though he was. And I remember I did a session of voiceover really early on, and then a few months later, John called me in again, but this time he had Neil's performance captured, and that really grounded the mother-son relationship for me, to see the vulnerability of this boy and the love that he had for the wolf. It only made my love for him grow even more. And it's such a beautiful image to see these two very different creatures have this very real bond.
I really loved all the Disney references and the homages to the original film, but I stayed through the credits and I noticed at the very end it says Fantasound was the sound.
Yes.
I was wondering if that just a joke that you guys added, or is Disney really calling their sound mixing department Fantasound now?
Fantasound. Fantasound, since it was going to be a concert film, Walt had a vision to put the audience in the middle of the music. And what would be required, and I think they only did it in 2 theaters. I think they did Carthay Circle, I did a theater in New York. They put speakers all around the theater, which cost a tremendous amount of money, even in its day. I think it was $100,000 to outfit a theater. And they had to mic the orchestra using a lot of isolated microphones, I think 30 microphones. I don't know the specifics, I don't remember them, but this was essentially what the concept was. And I remember when I was talking to my sound people and to my composer, John Debney, I said, wouldn't it be cool to explore what Fantasound would be now? Because it only worked in 2 theaters and only for the 1 film. I think it was something he thought you'd use in perpetuity, but it was something that was abandoned rather quickly. And the sound engineer said, well, Atmos sound has that many speakers all around the theater. You use it for sound effects. There's no reason you couldn't use it for music. And so I talked to John Debney about, and he's a Disney guy. He grew up on the Disney lot. He knew Walt. He hung out with the Sherman Brothers when he was a little kid. So he breathes Disney. He knows the culture. And he really leapt at the opportunity. And so when we were miking the orchestra, we isolated instruments when we could. And in the sound mix, Laura Hirschberg, who's our music mixer, we tasked her in the Atmos mix with creating a Fantasound mix. So if you go to see the film, certainly in Atmos, perhaps, I'm not sure in 7.1 how it works, but specifically for Atmos, you will feel that there are instruments that move around the theater, especially isolated instruments like the flute as Mowgli's running. So if you ever see it in a Dolby cinema, you'll experience a version of what we were trying to channel, which was Walt's vision for this. Once again, that is one of dozens of little opportunities we were looking for to somehow tie back into the legacy. There are visual cues in the film that, as time goes on and people get more familiar with it, you'll start to notice bits of Dumbo in there. Looking at the Monstro chase and Pinocchio inspired some of the King Louis stuff. And certainly from Jungle Book, you'll see a lot of shots that are pulled from one film into the next. But to me, that's part of the fun of this. It's really just embracing the opportunity and the emotional connection that we have from growing up with these films and seeing how much of it we could, just knead back into the dough of the film. And Fantasound was one thing I had wanted to do. Just for a moment like this, just to be able to have an excuse to talk about what Walt was going for, and for people who are fans who appreciate that we're trying to fulfill, as they do with the parks, as the parks always change and grow, the movies should too.
But I wanted to know if there was a place that you went or someone you drew from or to get that across, that maternal instinct, strong maternal instinct, perhaps your own mother or something like that.
I think my mother had a lot to do with what inspired me. Because, she's my example, and she's a very good mother. I asked myself a lot of questions about what it would be like to lose one of my own, though I'm not a mother myself, but I do love children. When I was 12, I preferred to stay indoors and babysit my cousins than go outside and play. So there's that part of me that is very much alive. I gravitate towards children. So yeah, my mother definitely was someone who inspired me.
This question is for the fathers up there. In the movie, Mowgli essentially had 3 father figures that all had very different philosophies on life. You know, one of them was just teaching him to be a leader, one was teaching him to survive individually, and the other one is kind of, you know, exploring his creative side and letting him do what he wants. So personally, like, how do you guys raise your kids? Which would you more associate towards, you know?
I think if you're blessed with children, I think you have to adapt to each child and each moment. I think you have to be very pragmatic as a parent. I think it's a lot to do with attention and responding to the ever-changing complexities of a child's needs and to address them moment by moment rather than have a set book of rules. That's my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, I'm finding with my 4 daughters that you know, you first learn as a parent when your child comes out, you want to form them and do all the right things for them, and then you look at them one day and you go, oh, they're already formed. They've got their own deal going. And then that's the moment for me that it clicked in that they're each very, very different.
There is the room for the different style of parenting and storytelling, which is what are the traditions, what are the myths of a culture for? They're to try to help the young generation not have to learn lessons painfully, because you can learn them through visualization and through story. And rule systems are effort out of love, I think, to save the next generation from the pain that the older generation goes through. To explain to them that the stove is hot without them having to touch it. And of course, that's a fantasy. You can't protect, they have to learn on their own as well. But that is part of the strength of a culture, is that you can help at least give them a context, contextualize their struggles so that as they persevere and come out the other end, they understand what it means and it gives it purpose.
Tell me, you ever had a taste of the pawpaw fruit down there in Sini? Some people call it what's the word? Papaya. Stolen words. I say pawpaw goes to the sound it makes when it tumbles to the jungle floor. Try it. Go ahead.
It's good.
You know who I am?
No.
I am the king of the Badalag. Call me Louis.
So although there are 3 father figures and 1 mother figure here, it's really a division, a deconstruction of what parents are. They have elements of all of them. And just like Dorothy with her friends going down the yellow brick road, they all represent different aspects of what goes on in our brain, I think. And so as a parent, sometimes I'm Bagheera, sometimes I'm Baloo, sometimes Akela, sometimes Raksha.
How did you handle the stunts? Because obviously, I'm sure there's a shortage of short stuntmen. So how did you handle those scenes?
Well, I'm not a climber that much because I was raised in the city, so I don't climb as much. But after the movie, it looks like I'm climbing. I'm always climbing, and it's like 400 feet off the ground. But I can only be 30 inches off the ground, so it's just a blue pad, and it looks like it's so like far down, but it's really not.
But he did. But one of the reasons we hired Neil, and one of the things he neglected to share, which was a big deal for us, was we put him through the paces with the stuntmen before we hired him to see what type of athlete he was. And Neil's actually graded a lot of sports, but and so when I would direct him, sometimes it was more like being a coach. So sometimes in a scene, he was, his body posture wasn't right, and I'd say, be more poised, be a little more explosive, and we weren't getting there. And I said, do you play baseball? He's like, yeah. I said, do you ever steal a base? He's like, oh yeah. I said, pretend you're getting ready to steal second base. So when you watch him running away from the cattle in the stampede, that wonderful posture he had, he was stealing bases. I said, okay, go for it. Okay, the pitcher's looking at you. Okay, go for it, break for it. And so you get this incredible sense of focus out of him. And really, that's the trick of acting. You do it to yourself. Depending on what technique you were trained in, it's tricking yourself into believing that what you're doing is real and creating an immediate moment, especially on film, where you just need a moment of clarity. And when Neil's eyes would light up, it would light up the screen. I knew I needed someone to anchor emotionally the whole story and for you to subjectively see it through the eyes of it. And somebody who, even when he was not being busy, is somebody who's going to be compelling and somebody you relate to and enjoy watching for an hour and a half, which is a lot to ask of any actor. And so it was Neil, just the energy, you see who he is, as Giancarlo said, they are who they are, even from a young age. They kind of inherit their soul. And on top of that, just being able to keep him engaged for the 9 months we were working together to keep that immediacy and that focus on cue for when we had to film. So it's a big deal what Neil was able to do, and I think a testament to all the people, not just the people on this couch who worked with him, but also the crew, which was really like a family.
Can you kind of speak to, you've produced really large movies, and this is a really big movie, but such a unique one. Can you sort of speak to?
I had the wonderful experience of working for the last 20 plus years at Disney as an executive, overseeing production from that side of things. And I transitioned from that position to this film as a producer. John was very gracious to embrace me in that role. And that was also my only, most important job. The biggest job I had was to find, I think, the right filmmaker. And so we knew when Alan talked about making this title and what we could do with this title, and we all imagined what it could be, you started to figure out what kind of skill sets you needed to pull that off. You need someone who had the warmth and humanity to inject it with the charm and with the thematic quality you needed. And then you also had to have someone who knew how to master this incredibly complex thing, because we knew that there wasn't going to be a live animal on the set. There couldn't be. In fact, to portray it the way Kipling had envisioned it, if perhaps even for the first time, because he was envisioning a live-action world with a child living amongst these animals. We needed someone who could do all that, and when you looked at the list, it whittled down to one guy. And I'd known John a little bit.
And he wasn't available.
And then we called John. But John and I worked together a little bit on some development of a very ambitious idea before that was also Disney-related, and I knew that he knew these things. He was very uniquely situated in knowing how to do all that. And beyond that, I also knew from the stuff we'd worked on earlier of his deep passion for Disney itself and for what it represented, and he knew that as well. And I'd been in the company for 20-some-odd years, and he knew it as well as anyone that I'd worked with, if not better. And so we were very lucky that he was available.
I think your love for the story shows in every frame. So going into it, what was your biggest fear? And now coming out of it and having it come to the masses, what are you most proud of or most excited for people to see?
My biggest thing was not to drop the ball on the people, for the people who love this underlying property. And knowing inherently I couldn't just take the G-rated musical for children and make it photoreal. I knew we were going to have to deviate in some basic inherent ways from that, and could you still preserve the soul and the charm and the feeling of the first one while including aspects from the Kipling stories and changing it from a G-rated musical to a PG-rated adventure that would have more thrills and be more exciting and scarier at times than the original, but also maintain the heart, the humor, and the music too. And this is something that belonged to the whole culture before we decided to update it. And so so it's very exciting, and these have been a very exciting couple of days as people are seeing it for the first time, and as these thoughtful questions are coming through, as I sit in the rooms and talk to each of you, I'm starting to get the sense of how it all came together and how we did. So I think we're very grateful to all of you for taking the time to ask these thoughtful questions, to take the time to share spread the word about it, and also to the sense of relief as this is all closing out and we could kind of exhale and let it know that our job's done and now it goes out to the world.